I stood on my dad's porch with my mom's old recipe still warm in my hands, and he told me to leave like I was a stranger. The next morning, he called to demand the key to the property my mom left me. I did not yell. I did not cry. I said one sentence, and the entire perfect family they built cracked right down the middle. My name is Avery Parker, and I am 32 years old. I sat in my idling sedan, the heater rattling against the silence of the suburban night, staring at a house that looked like it had been ripped straight from the pages of a high-end lifestyle magazine. This was Wexford Heights. It was the kind of neighborhood where the snow did not seem to pile up in dirty mounds, but rather draped itself artistically over manicured hedges and slate roofs. Every house on the street was a competition in festive lighting. But my father's house won by a landslide. It glowed with a golden, aggressive warmth. Tasteful white string lights outlined every architectural peak of the roof. A massive wreath, surely costing $300 or more, hung centered on the mahogany front door, adorned with a velvet bow the color of oxblood. Through the large bay window, I could see the silhouette of a 12-foot fir tree, heavy with ornaments that probably cost more than my entire car. It was beautiful. It was perfect. And looking at it made me feel like an intruder in my own life. I looked down at the passenger seat. Sitting there, nestled in a cardboard box lined with tea towels, was a Dutch apple pie. It was still warm. I could smell the cinnamon and nutmeg overcoming the stale air of my car's ventilation system. This was not store-bought. This was my mother's recipe. It was the specific crumb-topping version that my father, Greg, used to beg for every December. I had spent 4 hours in my small kitchen that morning, peeling apples until my fingers were sticky and sore, making sure the crust was flaky, making sure it was perfect. I had told myself that this year would be different. I had told myself that if I just showed up with something sweet, something nostalgic, I could bridge the gap. I was not naive. I knew Vanessa, my stepmother, did not like me. I knew her daughter, Tessa, viewed me as a relic from a past they wanted to erase. But he was my dad, deep down. Under the layers of expensive sweaters and new country club mannerisms, he was still the guy who taught me how to fish at Pinewater Lake. I turned off the ignition. The engine died, and the silence of the winter night rushed in, heavy and suffocating. I stepped out of the car. The cold was immediate, a sharp bite against my cheeks that made my eyes water. I reached in and grabbed the pie dish with both hands. It was heavy, warm, and fragile. I kicked the car door shut with my heel and began the long walk up the driveway. The snow crunched loudly under my boots. It was the only sound in the world. I could see shadows moving behind the sheer curtains of the living room. I could see the flicker of the fireplace. It looked so inviting. The kind of scene you see in commercials where families in matching pajamas drink cocoa and laugh about things that do not matter. I reached the porch. The welcome mat was new. It had a monogram on it, the Millers. It felt like a barrier. I took a breath, holding the pie in one hand, balancing it carefully against my hip, and pressed the doorbell with my freezing finger. The chime was melodic and deep, resonating through the heavy wood of the door. Inside, I heard the immediate sounds of life. There was the clinking of crystal glassware, a burst of laughter high and bright that I recognized as Tessa's. I heard the low murmur of a man's voice, someone confident, likely Miles, Tessa's fiancé. Then, I heard my father's voice. It sounded happy. He was laughing at something, a booming sound that I used to love. Then, the footsteps approached. The laughter inside died down, replaced by a hushed silence. Someone must have checked the peephole or the security camera feed. "Wait a second," a voice said inside. It was Vanessa. Her tone was not harsh. It was dismissive. "Hold on." I straightened my back. I put on the smile I had practiced in the rearview mirror. I was ready to be gracious. I was ready to apologize for things I had not done, just to be let in out of the cold. I waited for the lock to turn. I waited for the heavy door to swing open and for the warmth to hit my face. The door did not open. Instead, the deadbolt remained firmly in place. The handle did not turn. I stood there, confused. the heat of the pie dish beginning to burn my palm through the thin towel, while the winter wind whipped around my ankles. "Dad," I called out. My voice sounded small in the vast, open porch. There was a pause. Then, my father's voice came through the wood. It was close, right on the other side, but it was muffled. It did not sound like the dad who taught me to fish. It sounded like a stranger delivering a rehearsed line. "Go away, Avery," he said. I blinked, the cold snowflakes catching on my eyelashes. "Dad, it's me. I brought the pie. Mom's apple pie." "I said go away," Greg replied. His voice was louder this time, sharper. "Vanessa doesn't want you in. Not tonight." I felt a physical blow to my chest, harder than the freezing wind. "Dad, it is Christmas. I drove 40 minutes. I just want to say hello." "We have guests, Avery," he said, and the way he said guests made it sound like royalty. "We are having a private celebration. Today is only for important people. Today is only for important people." The words hung in the freezing air between us, suspended like the ice crystals forming on the porch railing. I stood frozen. The rejection was total. It was not just that I was uninvited. It was the classification. I was not important. I was not family. I was a disruption to the aesthetic. Then, I heard it. It was faint, but in the silence of the night, it was unmistakable. Vanessa laughed. It was a soft, snickering sound right behind the door. It was not a nervous laugh. It was a laugh of triumph. It was the sound of a woman who had successfully managed a pest control problem. It was the sound of someone who knew exactly who was standing outside in the snow and found it pathetic. "Greg, come back to the toast," I heard Vanessa coo, her voice drifting away from the door. "The champagne is getting warm." "I am coming," my father said, and then I heard his footsteps retreat. He walked away. He did not open the door to look me in the eye. He did not take the pie. He did not offer an explanation. He left me standing on his porch with a ceramic dish in my hands, separated from the warmth by 2 inches of wood and a lifetime of apathy. I did not knock again. I did not yell. I did not throw the pie at the door, though every instinct in my body screamed for me to do something violent, something to make them acknowledge my existence. But I was Avery Parker. I was raised to be dignified. I was raised by a mother who taught me that screaming only shows them you are bleeding. I turned around. The walk back to the car felt miles longer than the walk up. My legs felt numb, not from the cold, but from shock. My hands were shaking so violently that the ceramic dish rattled against the edge of the cardboard box. I had to stop halfway down the driveway and grip the pie with both arms, hugging it to my chest like a lifeline, just to keep from dropping it into the snow. I looked back at the house one last time. Through the window, I saw them. I saw the back of my father's head. I saw Vanessa in a shimmering silver dress, raising a flute of champagne. I saw Tessa and Miles leaning in, smiling. It looked like a catalog. It looked like the American dream. And I was the ghost haunting the perimeter. I got into my car and tossed the pie onto the passenger seat. Some of the crumb toppings spilled onto the upholstery. I did not care. I started the engine, my hands trembling so hard I could barely grip the steering wheel. I reversed out of the driveway, my tires spinning briefly on a patch of ice before catching traction. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of highway lights and unshed tears. I drove mechanically. I navigated the icy roads of Wexford Heights, down through the winding connector routes, and back to the modest part of town where I lived. I did not turn on the radio. The silence in the car was heavy, filled only with the smell of cooling apples and the ghost of a Christmas that never happened. When I finally unlocked the door to my apartment, the air inside felt stale. It was clean, organized, and safe, but it was empty. I did not turn on the lights. I dropped my keys on the counter and walked into the living room, still wearing my coat and boots. I sat down on the floor. I did not sit on the sofa. I sank right down onto the rug, pulling my knees to my chest. On the low bookshelf across from me, illuminated by the street lamp outside my window, was a framed photograph. It was taken 15 years ago. It was me and my mom, standing on the deck of the cabin at Pinewater Lake. She was laughing, her hair windblown, her arm draped tight around my shoulders. I looked so young in the photo, so safe. What did I do wrong? I whispered to the empty room. My voice cracked. I asked it again, louder. What did I do wrong? I replayed the scene on the porch. I analyzed my tone. Had I been too pushy? Had I not called enough in the weeks prior? I tried to find the fault in my own actions. Because that is what children of broken families do. We assume the crack in the foundation is our fault. We assume that if we just mold ourselves into a better shape, we will fit into the puzzle. But as I sat there, watching the shadows lengthen across the floor, the sadness began to shift. It curdled. It hardened. I had promised myself that this year would be different, and I was right. It was different. In previous years, the rejection had been subtle. A forgotten birthday, a seat at the far end of the table, a passive-aggressive comment about my career or my clothes. This was not subtle. This was an eviction. Today is for important people. The words echoed in my head, over and over, pulsing with the beat of my heart. They had built a wall, and tonight, they had put the final brick in place. I was not just a daughter they found annoying. I was a stranger. I looked at the photo of my mom again. She looked fierce in that picture. She was the one who had bought the cabin. She was the one who had built the assets that my father enjoyed before he met Vanessa. She was the one who warned me, years ago, that some people only love you as long as you are convenient. I wiped my face. The tears had stopped. The shaking in my hands had settled into a steady, cold vibration. I did not know it then, sitting on the floor of my dark apartment, but that night on the porch was not just an act of cruelty. It was not just a social snub by a wicked stepmother. It was a tactical maneuver. They did not close the door because they hated me. They closed the door because they were preparing to do something that required me to be gone. They needed me to feel small. They needed me to feel cut off. They needed me to doubt my place in the world, so that when they made their next move, I would be too weak to fight back. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the falling snow. They thought the silence from my end was defeat. They thought that by sending me away, they had solved the problem of Avery Parker. But they were wrong. That night was just the opening move, and what they wanted was not just to break my heart. They were coming for the only thing I had left. The sun was barely up when my phone rang. It was 9 a.m. on Christmas Day. I had slept for maybe 3 hours, a fitful, shallow rest on the living room floor, where I had eventually passed out from exhaustion. My eyes felt gritty, and my head pounded with the unique headache that comes from crying until you are dehydrated. I reached for the phone, squinting against the harsh winter light streaming through the window. The screen said, "Dad." My heart gave a stupid, hopeful leap. For a split second, I forgot the night before. I forgot the cold porch and the locked door. I thought maybe he was calling to apologize. I thought maybe he had woken up, seen the empty space where his daughter should have been, and felt the weight of his conscience. I cleared my throat, trying to sound normal, trying not to sound like a woman who had spent her Christmas Eve hugging a cold pie dish. "Hello?" I answered. "Avery? Good. I caught you." Greg's voice boomed down the line. He sounded breathless. He sounded busy. He sounded cheerful. There was absolutely no trace of the man who had told me to go away less than 12 hours ago. The dissonance was so jarring I actually pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it for a second. "Dad?" I asked, my voice wavering. "Is everything okay?" Fine. Everything is chaotic here. You know how it is," he said, rushing through the words. He sounded like a project manager running late for a meeting, not a father speaking to his child. "Listen, I need you to do something for me. I need the key to the cabin." I sat up straight, the blanket falling off my shoulders. "The cabin." "Yes, the Pinewater place," he said, impatient now. "Vanessa and I were talking this morning over coffee. Tessa wants to go up there next week. She wants to do her engagement photos in the snow. You know, by the frozen lake. It is supposed to be scenic." I felt the blood drain from my face. The cabin at Pinewater Lake was not just a piece of property. It was my mother's sanctuary. She had bought it with money she inherited from her own grandmother, long before she met my father. It was a small A-frame structure tucked deep in the woods, 2 hours north of the city. It smelled of cedar and old books. It was where we spent every summer. It was where I learned to swim. And crucially, it was the one place my father had always complained about. He hated the drive. He hated the bugs. He hated that the Wi-Fi was spotty. He had not set foot there in 6 years. Tessa wants to take photos there, I repeated, trying to process the request. But Dad, nobody has been up there in months. The heat is turned down to the maintenance level. The driveway is probably buried in 3 feet of snow. That is why Miles is going, Greg said. He wants to go up a day early to survey the place. He says he wants to check the structure, maybe see if we need to do some renovations to make it more comfortable for the shoot. He is very handy. You know, he wants to make sure it is perfect for Tessa. I rubbed my temples. The audacity was breathtaking. Dad, I said, keeping my voice low, you threw me out last night. There was a pause on the line. It was short, a mere hiccup in his manic energy. Oh, Avery, stop, he said, his tone shifting from busy to dismissive. Do not be dramatic. Last night was complicated. Vanessa was stressed. You know how she gets about hosting. We are moving past that. We are focusing on the family now. Tessa is getting married. This is a big time for us. For us. I am family too, I said. It was a weak protest, and I hated myself for making it. Then act like it, Greg snapped. The cheerfulness evaporated, replaced by the tone he used when I was a teenager and forgot to fill the gas tank. Act like a supportive sister. Tessa loves that lake. She deserves this. Don't be selfish. Avery, it is Christmas. For God's sake. I felt a wave of nausea. He was calling me selfish on the morning of a holiday I had spent alone, asking for access to a house that legally belonged to me, for the benefit of a stepsister who had never once been kind to me. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated against my ear. Then it vibrated again, and again. I pulled the phone away to look at the screen. A new group chat had been created. The participants were Dad, Vanessa, Tessa, Avery. The first message was from Vanessa. Merry Christmas. Avery. I hope you are having a restful morning. Greg mentioned he is asking you about the cabin keys. I just wanted to jump in and say how much we appreciate this. It will mean the world to Tessa. We want to keep everything transparent so there is no confusion. It was masterfully written. It was polite. It was public. It framed my compliance as a foregone conclusion. If I said no now, I would look like a monster who was ruining a young bride's dream. Then a message from Miles popped up. I had never even given Miles my number, which meant Tessa must have shared the contact card. Hey Avery, Miles here. Looking forward to checking out the property. I pulled up the satellite specs. Great location. I have some ideas about optimizing the layout. If we winterize the deck properly, you could really increase the utilization rate. Shame to let an asset like that sit idle. I stared at the words, asset and utilization. This was not about engagement photos. You do not talk about optimizing layouts for a photo shoot. You do not talk about utilization rates for a weekend trip. Did you see the texts? Greg asked in my ear. He was still on the line. I see them, I said. Dad, Miles is talking about renovations. He is talking about assets. What is actually going on? He is just enthusiastic, Greg said, but his voice lacked conviction. He sounded like he was reading from a script he had not fully memorized. He is in real estate, Avery. That is how he talks. He just wants to fix the place up a bit. You should be grateful. You let that place rot. It is practically a liability. It is not a liability, I said, my voice hardening. It is maintained. I pay the property taxes. I pay the insurance. I pay for the landscaping service. It is a waste, Greg corrected himself. It is a waste of potential. Miles was saying last night that in this market, a waterfront property is a gold mine if it is managed right. We are just thinking about the future, the family's future. There it was again. We, family. I realized something then. Sitting on my floor in the cold morning light, my father was not coming up with these arguments. Greg was a man who worked in insurance sales. He did not use words like optimize or utilization. He did not care about the cabin. He had likely been coached all morning. I could picture it, Vanessa pouring him coffee, Miles showing him spreadsheets on an iPad, Tessa crying about how perfect the lake would be. They had worked on him until he believed that demanding my key was not theft, but a noble act of fatherhood. "Dad," I said, "the cabin is in my name. Mom left it to me." "And who paid the mortgage while she was sick?" Greg shot back. "We are not doing this, Avery. We are not doing the mine versus yours game. We are a family. Tessa is your sister. Miles is going to be your brother-in-law. You are going to let them use the cabin." It was not a question. It was a command. My instinct was to scream no. My instinct was to tell him to go to hell and hang up, but I worked in risk and compliance at Northbridge. My entire job was about analyzing threats, reading the fine print, and making sure that when a disaster happened, the paper trail was clean. If I said no right now, I gave them ammunition. I would be the villain. I would be the unstable daughter who ruined Christmas and refused to help her sister. They would use my anger against me. They would say I was emotional. They would say I was bitter. I needed time. I needed to understand what optimizing actually meant. "I hear you," I said. I forced my voice to be flat. I stripped all the emotion out of it. "I understand Tessa wants to take photos." "Good," Greg said, exhaling. "I knew you would come around. You can drop the key off today. Just put it in the mailbox if you do not want to come in, or I can swing by and—" "I cannot give you the key today," I interrupted. The silence on the other end was sharp. "Excuse me. I need to check the paperwork," I lied. "The insurance policy on the cabin has strict clauses about non-owner occupancy during the winter months because of the frozen pipes risk. If Miles goes up there and accidental damage occurs while I'm not present, the claim could be denied. I need to review the liability coverage before I authorize any guests." "Authorize guests?" Greg sputtered. "He is not a guest, Avery. He is family." "To the insurance company, he is a third party," I said. "And if he is doing surveys or renovations, that changes the classification of the visit from recreational to construction. That requires a different rider." I was improvising, but it sounded plausible. It sounded like the boring, bureaucratic corporate talk that my father dealt with at work but hated. "This is ridiculous," Greg snapped. "Just give me the damn key. Nobody is going to sue anybody." "I cannot do that, Dad," I said calmly. "I cannot expose myself to that level of risk without verifying the coverage. I will look at the files today. I will let you know." "Vanessa is waiting for an answer," Greg said, his voice dropping to a low growl. "She has a schedule." "Then she will have to wait for the compliance check," I said. "You are being difficult on purpose," Greg said. "You are punishing us for last night." "I am being responsible," I countered. "You raised me to be responsible. Didn't you—" He made a noise of frustration, a guttural sound of a man who was being squeezed from both sides. "Fine. Check your stupid papers. But Miles wants to go up on Tuesday. Do not drag this out." He hung up without saying goodbye. I lowered the phone and looked at the group chat. Miles had sent another message, a link to a listing for a luxury winter engagement package at a resort nearby, probably as a comparison for what they wanted to create. I did not reply to the text. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my mind was starting to clear. The sadness from the night before was being replaced by a cold, sharp suspicion. They did not just want to take photos. You do not need to optimize a house for photos. You do not need to survey the structure for a wedding album. I stood up and walked to the closet where I kept my important documents. I pulled down the heavy plastic bin marked Mom. My father thought I was being petty. He thought I was playing a game of emotional tug-of-war. But he was wrong. I was not playing. I was investigating. Because something about the way Miles used the word asset made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. They were not asking for a favor. They were announcing a takeover. And if I was going to stop it, I needed to know exactly what legal ground I was standing on. I opened the bin. The smell of my mother's perfume drifted up from the papers, faint, floral, and heartbreakingly familiar. I took a deep breath. "Okay, Mom," I whispered. "Let us see what you really left me." The plastic bin containing my mother's life was heavy, sitting on my dining table like a tangible anchor in a world that had suddenly become unmoored. I had not opened this box in 3 years. The last time was when I needed to find her original Social Security card for a tax audit. I remembered closing it with a sense of grief so profound it felt like physical nausea. But today, there was no nausea. There was only a cold, vibrating clarity. I lifted the lid. Inside, the hanging folders were color-coded, a habit I had inherited from her. I bypassed the medical records and the sentimental letters and went straight to the folder marked Property Pine Water. I spread the documents out on the wooden table. The room was silent except for the hum of my refrigerator and the occasional passing car on the slushy street outside. First, I picked up the last will and testament. It was standard, drafted by a lawyer named Mr. Henderson when my mother first got sick. It was unambiguous. I leave my entire estate, real and personal, to my daughter, Avery Elizabeth Parker. Next, I found the deed of trust. My eyes scanned the legal description of the land, the lot numbers, and the boundaries, and there, in the section for the grantee, was my name, just my name, not Greg Parker, not the Parker Family Trust, just me. I dug deeper and found the document that mattered most, the quitclaim deed. Years ago, right after they bought the house in Wexford Heights. My father had signed this. My mother had insisted on it. She had used her inheritance to buy the cabin outright, and she wanted to ensure it remained separate property, distinct from their marital assets. I ran my finger over my father's signature. It was messy, hasty. I remembered that day. He had joked that she didn't trust him. She had just smiled and said, "I trust you, Greg. I just don't trust life." I set the paper down. Legally, I was bulletproof. The house was mine. My father had zero claim to it. Vanessa had negative claim to it, so why was I shaking? I turned to my laptop. I needed to verify something that had been nagging at me since the phone call with my father. He had mentioned that Miles had pulled up the satellite specs. That phrase was specific. You do not get detailed specs from Google Earth. You get them from a property report. I logged into my email and searched for Henderson. I wanted to find the old correspondence just to reassure myself. I found an email from 5 years ago, shortly after Mom passed. Subject: finalizing title transfer. Dear Avery, just a reminder that the deed has been recorded, as this property was purchased with inherited funds and your father signed the spousal waiver. This is considered separate property. It is fully yours. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. It was as if Mr. Henderson had seen the future. I was about to close the tab when a notification in my spam folder caught my eye. It was from a service called Title Watch. I had signed up for it years ago, a free service that alerted homeowners if a lien was placed on their property or if someone requested an official copy of their deed. It was one of those set-it-and-forget-it things I used for my job in compliance. I clicked the email. The subject line read, "Activity detected parcel 402B, Pinewater Lake." My stomach dropped. I opened the alert. The timestamp was from yesterday, December 25th, at 4 in the afternoon, while I was driving my mother's pie to my father's house, while I was standing on the porch being told I was not important enough to enter. Someone was querying the official title of my cabin. I grabbed my phone. It was the day after Christmas, a Friday. Most government offices were closed or running on skeleton crews, but the automated systems would still be logging activity. I dialed the number for the county recorder's office in the district where the cabin was located. I expected a voicemail, but after 4 rings, a human answered. "County recorder, this is Linda," a voice rasped. She sounded bored and likely annoyed to be working the day after a holiday. "Hi, Linda," I said, putting on my best professional voice. "My name is Avery Parker. I am the owner of a property on Lake Drive, parcel number 402B. I received an automated alert about a title inquiry, and I just wanted to verify if there was a filing error. Hold on, Linda sighed. I heard the clacking of a keyboard. What was the name again? Parker. Avery Parker. Okay, let me see. The typing stopped. I do not see a new filing, no liens, no transfer applications yet. Yet? I asked. The alert said there was an inquiry. Oh, right, Linda said. Yeah, I see it in the access log. Someone requested a certified abstract of title yesterday through the online portal. They paid the expedited fee to get the digital copy immediately. I gripped the phone tighter. Can you see who requested it? Public record requests are anonymous if they go through the third-party portal, Linda explained. But they used a corporate account, something called, wait for it, Sterling Edge Realty Solutions. I froze. Sterling Edge Realty Solutions. That was Miles's company. And Linda, I said, my voice trembling slightly, did they request anything else? Looks like they also pulled the plat map and the zoning restrictions for accessory dwelling units. Linda sounded confused. Are you planning to build a guest house or something? Because you cannot do that on a protected watershed. No, I whispered. I'm not planning anything. Well, somebody is, Linda said. They downloaded the full packet, 50 pages, cost them $80. I thanked her and hung up. I sat there, staring at the black screen of my phone. It was not just curiosity. You do not pay $80 on Christmas Day for a certified abstract unless you are building a case. Miles was not surveying the property for wedding photos. He was looking for loopholes. He was looking for zoning allowances. Suddenly, the conversation from the last few months replayed in my head. But this time, the context was different. I remembered a barbecue in July. Tessa had been sitting on the deck, swirling her wine. It is so weird that you keep that whole cabin just for yourself, she had said. It is, like, 3 bedrooms. Do you not feel selfish? A family could live there? I had laughed it off then. I thought she was just being her usual prickly self. I remembered Thanksgiving, the brief hour I was allowed to stay before traffic forced me to leave. Miles had cornered me by the drinks table. Hey, Avery, he had asked, casually peeling the label off his beer. Your mom left you the place, right? Was that a joint tenancy deal or tenants in common with your dad? Just curious how the estate tax hit you. I had thought he was just talking shop. I had told him it was separate property. I remembered the glint in his eyes when I said it. I thought it was respect. Now I realized it was calculation. He was assessing the target. And then, the events of last night clicked into a horrifying picture. The rejection at the door. The cruelty. The only for important people line. It was not just about hurting my feelings. It was a destabilization tactic. They knew that if they asked for the cabin outright, I would say no. But if they broke me down first, if they made me feel isolated, unloved, and desperate to belong, then I might hand over the keys as a peace offering. They wanted me to feel like I owed them. They wanted me to buy my way back into the family using the cabin as currency. And once Miles got access, once he was inside with his contractor tools, he wasn't going to fix the deck. He was going to find a way to claim residency, or he was going to start unapproved construction that would tangle the title in liens, or worse, he was going to find some loophole in the zoning that they could exploit to force a sale. Sterling Edge Realty Solutions, I said aloud. I looked at the papers on my table. They were just paper. Paper could be lost. Paper could be burned. If Miles and my father were willing to access government databases on Christmas Day, what else were they willing to do? I stood up and grabbed my smartphone. I opened a scanning app. I worked methodically. I scanned the will. I scanned the quitclaim deed. I scanned the original purchase agreement from 20 years ago. I scanned the email from Mr. Henderson. I scanned the death certificate. I created a new folder in my cloud storage. I named it Project North. Then I password protected it. Then I encrypted the zip file. But that was not enough. I emailed the files to my work address. Then I emailed them to a secondary Gmail account I hadn't used since college. I was breathing hard, like I had just run a mile. My apartment was perfectly still, but I felt like I was in a war zone. I walked over to the window and looked out at the street. A family was walking by, pulling a toddler on a sled. They looked happy, normal. My father had called me this morning and told me not to be selfish. He had told me to think of the family, but while he was saying those words, his stepson-in-law was reading my property deed, looking for a crack in the foundation. I walked back to the table and picked up the photo of my mother. "They are not just being mean. Mom," I whispered. "They are hungry." I realized then that the Avery Parker who had stood on the porch crying was gone, that Avery was a victim. The woman standing in the apartment now was something else entirely. I was an asset manager, and I had just discovered a hostile takeover attempt in progress. I was not just being insulted, I was being erased. They were trying to separate me from the one thing that gave me independence, and they were using my love for my father as the weapon to do it. I looked at the stack of papers one last time. I scooped them up and put them back in the folder. Then I put the folder back in the bin. But I did not put the bin back in the closet. I carried it to my bedroom and shoved it under my bed, behind a box of winter boots. It was a small, paranoid action, but I did not care. If they came here, if they used their spare key to check on me, I did not want the deed sitting on the dining table. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at my phone. There were 3 new messages in the group chat. "Vanessa Gregg says you are checking insurance. Let us know ASAP. We need to book the caterer for the shoot. Tessa, please do not be difficult. Avery, it is just a house." Miles, I can talk to your agent if the technical jargon is confusing. Let me help. I stared at the word help. He wanted to help himself to my inheritance. I did not reply. I turned the phone face down. I was done crying. I was done asking what I did wrong. The investigation was over. I knew exactly what was happening. And now, I had to make sure that when they finally made their move, they would walk straight into a wall. I walked into the guest room, which doubled as my storage space. In the corner, draped under a heavy quilt, sat my mother's cedar chest. I had not opened it since the week she died. The smell of cedar was too potent, too evocative of her presence. It was the scent of my childhood, of her wool sweaters, of the linens she only used for company. Opening it felt like reopening a wound that had never fully healed. But today, after seeing the digital footprints of Miles and Vanessa all over my property records, I felt a pull toward it. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was an instinct. I pulled the quilt off. The wood was smooth and cool under my fingers. I lifted the heavy lid, and the scent hit me sharp. Spicy cedar mixed with the fainter, sweeter smell of lavender sachets. The chest was filled with the artifacts of a life well lived. There were photo albums, a christening gown, a stack of old journals. I ran my hand over a soft cashmere scarf, the one she wore every winter. Beneath the scarf, tucked between the folds of a hand-stitched quilt, my fingers brushed against something stiff. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope. I pulled it out. On the front, in my mother's elegant, looping handwriting, were the words, "For Avery." When you feel pressured. My breath hitched. It wasn't for Avery when I'm gone, or for Avery on your wedding day. It was specific. When you feel pressured. I sat down on the floor, leaning my back against the chest. The silence of the apartment seemed to deepen, the noise of the outside world fading away until there was only me and this message from the grave. I carefully tore open the seal. The letter inside was 3 pages long, written on her favorite stationery. The ink was blue, unfaded. "My dearest Avery, if you are reading this, I assume enough time has passed that the initial grief has settled, and life has begun to move forward. But I also assume that something has happened to make you feel small, to make you feel like you owe something to people who have not earned it." I wiped a tear from my cheek. She knew. Even then, she knew. "I want to talk to you about the cabin." The letter continued. "I know you think of it as just a summer house, a place where we grilled corn and caught fireflies. But to me, it was always more than that. It was insurance. I love your father. You know I do. But I also know that Greg is a man who likes the path of least resistance. He is a good man, but he is pliable. He wants peace, and sometimes he will trade the wrong things to get it. I nodded slowly, the truth of her words resonating with the pain in my chest. That was exactly what Greg was doing. He was trading my dignity and my property for peace with Vanessa. When I bought the cabin with Nana's money, I saw how people looked at it. Not just strangers, but friends, family. They see a second home and they think excess. They think available. They think that because you have it, you are obligated to share it. People who are otherwise kind can become very cold when they spot an opportunity. Assets change the temperature of a room. Avery. I thought of Miles. I thought of his utilization rates and optimizing layouts. He didn't see a home. He saw an opportunity. He saw a resource that was being wasted on a single woman. I insisted on the separate title not because I didn't trust your father to love me, but because I didn't trust the world to treat you fairly if he was not there to protect you, or, heaven forbid, if he was the one being pressured. I turned the page. My hands were trembling again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from the shock of validation. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being selfish or dramatic, as Greg had claimed. I was responding to a threat that my mother had identified years ago. There is a reason the deed is in your name alone. It is your anchor. It is your leverage. It is the one thing that ensures you never have to stay in a room where you are not respected just because you have nowhere else to go. And then, I read the sentence that made my heart stop. If a day comes when you are being argued over at a holiday dinner, or if you are made to feel guilty for owning what is rightfully yours, remember this: the cabin is yours. It is not a favor someone is allowing you to keep. It is your birthright. Do not apologize for it. I let out a shaky breath. Argued over at a holiday dinner. It was as if she had been standing on the porch with me last night. She had foreseen the exact dynamic: the guilt trips, the exclusion, the manipulation. But the letter wasn't just emotional support. The final page was practical. It was tactical. I took a precaution. She wrote, "When Mr. Henderson filed the deed, I had him register a standing fraud alert and a notice of interest with the county title company. It is an obscure filing, usually used for commercial properties, but it means that any attempt to transfer, lien, or even heavily modify the deed requires a notarized identity verification in person, not just a digital signature. It is a tripwire. Avery, if anyone tries to move that property without you standing right there, the system will flag it." I stared at the paper. A tripwire. That explained why Miles had requested the certified abstract. He must have hit a wall online. He tried to do something, maybe prep a transfer, maybe set up a lien for a loan and the system blocked him. So he paid for the full abstract to figure out why. He was looking for the obstruction. My mother hadn't just left me a house. She had left me a defense system. I carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. The feeling of helplessness that had plagued me for the last 24 hours vanished. In its place was a steely resolve. I was not alone in this fight. My mother was fighting with me. She had planted mines in the field years ago, knowing that one day, wolves might come to the door. I stood up and walked out of the guest room. I went to the kitchen and placed the letter on the counter, right next to my phone. The phone screen was dark. I knew that if I unlocked it, there would be missed calls from Greg. There would be passive-aggressive texts from Vanessa. There would be helpful links from Miles. I didn't unlock it. I wasn't going to call Greg back. Not yet. I wasn't going to argue about insurance policies or liability clauses anymore. That was defensive. I was done playing defense. I needed more than just suspicions. I needed proof. I needed to know exactly how far they had gone. Had they listed it? Had they tried to borrow against it? Miles had mentioned optimizing. That sounded like money. You optimize an asset to extract value. I looked at the letter one last time. Do not apologize for it. I made a decision then. I would not engage with them until I had the full picture. I would let them think I was cowed. I would let them think I was checking the papers and calming down. Let them believe their pressure campaign was working. Let them get confident, because when people get confident, they get sloppy. I went to my laptop and opened a new document. I titled it, Timeline of Events, December 24th, Ejected from Family Home, Reason Given, Guests, December 25th, 4:00 p.m. Title Inquiry by Sterling Edge, Realty Solutions. December 25th, Morning Demand for Keys, Narrative Shift to Family Unity. I was building a case, and I wasn't going to present it to a therapist. I was going to present it to them, right when they least expected it. I looked at the promise I had made to myself the night before that this year would be different. It certainly was. Last year, I would have cried and given them the key just to stop the conflict. This year, I had a map. I touched the envelope again, treating it like a holy relic. It was my compass. It pointed true north, away from the gaslighting, away from the guilt. "Okay, Mom," I said to the empty kitchen. "I hear you. I am not giving them an inch." I grabbed my car keys. I wasn't going to the cabin yet. I had one stop to make first. I needed to see someone who knew the land, someone who knew the neighbors. I needed eyes on the ground. The game had changed. They weren't just fighting Avery the daughter anymore. They were fighting the estate of Elizabeth Parker, and they had no idea what they had just walked into. I was sitting in my car, engine idling, debating whether to drive to the county clerk's office or head straight to Pinewater, when my phone buzzed on the dashboard mount. The name on the screen made me pause. Mrs. Price Lake, Darlene Price. She was the nearest neighbor to our cabin, a retired school teacher who lived in a permanent residence about a quarter of a mile down the shore. She had been my grandmother's friend, then my mother's, and now she was the unofficial guardian of the cove. We exchanged Christmas cards, and I sent her a check every winter to keep an eye on the snow load on my roof. But she rarely called. I answered immediately. "Hi, Mrs. Price? Merry Christmas." "Avery, honey, are you okay?" Her voice was tight, breathless. It wasn't the warm, leisurely tone of a retiree catching up. It was the tone of someone who had just witnessed a car accident. "I am fine," I said, my grip on the steering wheel tightening. "Why is something wrong at the cabin? Did a pipe burst?" "Not a pipe," Darlene said. "I am calling because I just found something on your porch railing that should not be there, and I wanted to make sure you knew about it before I called the sheriff." The sheriff. My heart rate spiked. "Mrs. Price, what is going on?" "I was walking the dog this morning," she explained, her voice lowering as if she were afraid of being overheard in the empty woods. "I went past your place to check the driveway, and I saw a lockbox, one of those heavy-duty real estate ones. It was clamped right onto the main handrail." I went cold. "A lockbox? I didn't put a lockbox there. I am not selling." "I know you are not," Darlene said firmly. "That is what I told myself. Avery would never sell this place without telling me. But that is not all, honey. I have been seeing people." "People?" "About 3 weeks ago," Darlene said. "A woman came by. Flashy car, blonde, expensive coat. She came up the drive and started asking me questions while I was getting the mail. Vanessa." "What did she ask?" I demanded. "She asked about the market value in the area." Darlene recounted. "She asked if the properties here were selling over asking price. And then she asked something strange. She asked if I knew if your cabin was ever marital property. She used that exact phrase. She wanted to know if your father had paid for the renovations back in 2005. My stomach turned. Vanessa had been building a legal case. She was fishing for evidence that Greg had contributed to the asset, which would give them a foothold to claim it wasn't solely mine. I told her I didn't know anything about that. Darlene continued. "But then last week, a younger couple came, a girl who looked like the older woman, and a man, tall, dark hair, very confident. Tessa and Miles. The man was walking around the perimeter with a laser measure," Darlene said. "He was taking photos, not just snapshots. Avery, he had a tripod. He was taking those wide-angle shots, the kind they use for listings. He was moving the patio furniture around to make it look staged. I felt a wave of dizziness. Miles hadn't just been surveying for a wedding shoot. He had been preparing a marketing campaign. And then today, I see the lockbox," Darlene said. "It has a code pad on it. I knew something was wrong. So, I went and got my bolt cutters from the shed. I cut it off. Avery, it is sitting on my kitchen table right now. You cut it off? I asked, a mixture of shock and gratitude washing over me. Damn right I did, she said. It is your house. If you didn't put it there, it is trespassing. But Avery, you need to check the internet. My grandson, he looks at those rental apps. He showed me something. What did he show you? I asked, though I already dreaded the answer. Just look, she said. I think you have a problem. I thanked her, promised I would be there soon, and hung up. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely type. I opened the most popular vacation rental app on my phone. I typed in Pinewater Lake. I filtered for 3 bedrooms. I filtered for waterfront. There were only 12 results. I scrolled past the familiar cabins I knew, and then, there it was, my cabin. The photo was new. It was taken from a low angle to make the A-frame look majestic against the snowy backdrop. The sky had been edited to a vibrant blue. The patio furniture was arranged exactly as Darlene had described, with a bottle of wine, not my wine, sitting on the table. The title of the listing read, The Lakeside Haven. Perfect for intimate weddings, winter escapes. I clicked on it. My breath caught in my throat. Host Luxury Lake, stays managed by Miles. Description, experience the ultimate winter retreat. This recently updated family estate offers private lake access, a cozy fireplace, and a chef's kitchen, now accepting bookings for the holiday season and into the new year. Special packages available for wedding parties. Availability. January 2nd, open. January 15th, open. They were renting it out. They weren't asking to borrow it for a photo shoot. They weren't asking to use it for the family. They had already listed it. They were actively soliciting customers. I looked at the pricing. $450 a night. I scrolled down to the house rules. No pets. Key access via lockbox code provided upon booking. I felt a surge of rage so pure it almost blinded me. This wasn't just a boundary violation. This was fraud. This was theft. They were selling access to a property they did not own. And the timing. The timing was diabolical. The listing had been posted 3 days ago, before Christmas, before Greg had even asked me for the key. That meant the plan was already in motion before I even arrived at the house with the apple pie. The rejection on the porch wasn't a spontaneous reaction to Vanessa's stress. It was a calculated move to alienate me, to make me vulnerable, so that when they demanded the key the next morning, I would be so desperate for reconciliation that I would hand it over without asking questions. If I had given Greg the key this morning, Miles would have put it in that lockbox. The first renters would have arrived in January. And once there were paying tenants inside, once there was a revenue stream, they would have used that money to argue that they were managing the asset. They would have claimed I had abandoned it, and they were stepping in to save it. They were trying to create a fait accompli, a done deal. They wanted to present me with a reality where they were already running the show, making it impossible for me to kick them out without ruining reservations and contracts. I took a screenshot of the listing. I captured the host name. I captured the photos. I captured the calendar. Then, I looked at the contact info. It was a Google Voice number, but the profile picture was Miles, smiling his winning smile in a sharp suit. I sat back in my car seat, the cold leather pressing against my spine. My father had called me selfish. He had told me I was hurting the family. Meanwhile, his wife and her daughter's fiancé were running an illegal hospitality business out of my living room. I remembered the inquiry on the title report. Miles wasn't just checking zoning for a guest house. He was probably checking to see if he could get away with this. He probably wanted to see if I had a mortgage, if the bank would notice a commercial listing. He saw the property was paid off, owned by a single woman, and thought, easy target. They thought I was just a sad, lonely daughter who would do anything for daddy's approval. They thought I was weak. I looked at the screenshot of my house, my mother's house being pimped out for $450 a night. I started the car. I wasn't going to call them. I wasn't going to send an angry text. That would just warn them. That would give them time to delete the listing, to spin a story about how it was just a draft or a test. No, I had the listing. I had the witness in Darlene. I had the lockbox in her possession. I put the car in gear. I wasn't driving to the cabin to cry. I wasn't driving there to reminisce. I was driving to secure the perimeter. And then, I was going to burn their little business venture to the ground. Not with fire, but with the one thing they clearly didn't respect the law. I tapped the screen one last time, saving the evidence to my Project North folder. "Okay, Miles," I said, my voice steady and cold in the quiet car. "You want to play landlord? Let us see how you handle an eviction." I did not drive to the cabin immediately. Emotion was a liability in a crisis, and I had already spent enough time reacting. Now, I needed to execute. I pulled into the parking lot of a coffee shop 2 towns over from Wexford Heights, bought a black coffee, and opened my laptop. My first call was not to my father, but to a woman named Sarah, a civil litigation attorney who had been recommended to me by a colleague at Northbridge Risk Compliance. It was the day after Christmas, a Saturday, and I knew I would likely get her voicemail, but my colleague had given me her personal cell number for emergencies. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "Sarah speaking?" "Hi, Sarah. This is Avery Parker. Mark from Northbridge gave me your number. I have a situation involving potential title fraud and unauthorized commercial use of a property I own. I need to know how to lock it down before I confront the parties involved." I kept it brief. I did not mention it was my family. I did not mention the apple pie or the tears. I spoke in the language of fax deed holder, unauthorized access, intent to monetize. Sarah listened without interrupting. When she spoke, her voice was sharp and clinical. "First, do not give anyone access. If they establish tenancy, even by just staying there for a few weeks and receiving mail, it becomes a nightmare to evict them. Second, you need to file an affidavit of title with the county immediately, stating that no other parties have authorization to conduct business or transfer ownership. It puts a cloud on the title that alerts lenders. Third, if there is a listing online, you need to DMCA it. Treat it like a copyright strike. They are selling a product they do not own." "I have the listing," I said, looking at the screenshot on my phone. "They are using photos of my property." "Good," Sarah said. "Send a cease and desist to the platform's legal department. Attach your deed. Demand the listing be removed for fraud. It might take them 48 hours to process. But it creates a record that you oppose this from the moment you found it. If this goes to court, that timeline matters." "Thank you, Sarah," I said. "I am going up there now to secure the physical site." "Change the locks," she advised. "And Avery, if they show up while you are there, do not let them in. If they have a key, that is civil. If they break a window, that is criminal. Make them cross the line if they are going to do it." I hung up and felt a cold calm settle over me. I spent the next hour in the coffee shop acting as my own legal department. I drafted a formal email to the rental platform's trust and safety team. I attached the PDF of my deed, the scan of my driver's license, and the screenshot of the listing created by Sterling Edge Realty Solutions. Subject urgent. Fraudulent listing report. Property ID 402B. To whom it may concern, I am the sole legal owner of the property located at Pinewater Lake. The listing titled, "The Lakeside Haven," posted by user Miles, is unauthorized. The host has no legal standing to rent this property. I have not signed a management agreement. Any bookings accepted are invalid. Please remove this listing immediately to prevent consumer fraud. I hit send. Then, I drove to the county administration building. It was closed for the weekend, but I knew they had a drop box for time-sensitive filings. I filled out the Notice of Interest form I had downloaded, attached a notarized copy of my identity. Luckily, I carried my notary seal in my work bag and dropped it in the metal slot. It would be stamped first thing Monday morning. If Miles tried to file anything else, my notice would be sitting right on top of his pile. Only then did I drive to the hardware store. I bought a heavy-duty deadbolt, the kind with a keypad that I could control from my phone. I bought a video doorbell with a battery pack since I did not have time to mess with wiring. I bought 4 private property, no trespassing signs. I bought a new set of window locks, the cashier, a teenager chewing gum, looked at my pile of security equipment. Rough neighborhood. Just checking for pests, I said. The drive to Pinewater Lake took 2 hours. The roads were slick with black ice, but I drove with precision. When I turned onto the gravel driveway leading to the cabin, the sun was beginning to set, casting long, bruised shadows across the snow. The cabin stood silent among the pines. It looked peaceful, but as I walked up the steps, the violation was obvious. The scratch marks on the railing where Darlene had cut the lockbox were fresh and raw, exposing the light wood beneath the stain. I saw footprints in the snow that were not mine, large boot prints around the foundation. Likely where Miles had been surveying. I did not go inside to reminisce. I went to work. I unscrewed the old lock. It was a brass handle my mother had picked out. I felt a pang of sadness as I removed it, but I replaced it with the matte black digital deadbolt. I programmed a code that only I knew. I installed the video doorbell, syncing it to my phone so I would get an alert the second anyone stepped onto the porch. I walked the perimeter. I hammered the private property signs into the trees lining the driveway. They were ugly, bright orange and aggressive, clashing with the natural beauty of the woods. I did not care. They were a legal statement. In many jurisdictions, you cannot claim someone is trespassing unless the land is posted. Now, it was posted. By the time I finished, it was dark. The temperature had dropped to 10 degrees. I went inside, turned on the lights, and sat at the dining table, the same table where we used to play Scrabble. It was time to spring the trap. I could have just changed the locks and ghosted them. I could have let them drive up on Tuesday and find themselves locked out. But that would just be a delay. They would claim it was a misunderstanding. They would say I was being petty. I needed to expose the lie while they were all in the room. I opened the group chat. It had been silent for 6 hours, likely because they were waiting for me to cool off and comply. I typed carefully. Avery. I have reviewed the insurance papers and the liability concerns. I'm currently at the cabin. If you want to discuss the usage for the engagement photos and the renovations, please meet me here tomorrow at noon. All of you. Greg, Vanessa, Tessa, Miles. We need to sign a waiver before I can hand over any keys. It was the perfect bait. I used their language. I offered them what they wanted: the keys, the waivers, the discussion. I made it sound like I had capitulated, like I was just a bureaucrat who needed a signature to feel safe. The response was almost immediate. Dad. Finally. We will be there. Glad you are being reasonable. Vanessa. Thank you. Avery. We will bring lunch. Let's make it a nice afternoon. Miles. Sounds good. I will bring the specs I talked about. They had no idea. They thought they were coming to a surrender ceremony. I spent the rest of the evening preparing the room. I did not clean or decorate. I turned the dining room into a conference room. I cleared away the centerpiece. I set up my laptop at the head of the table. I arranged the chairs so they would have to sit facing me. I laid out my documents in 3 neat stacks. Stack 1, the deed and the will. Stack 2, the printout of the unauthorized Airbnb listing. Stack 3, the affidavit I had just filed. My phone rang. It was my father. Avery, he said. He sounded relieved, but there was still that edge of impatience. I just saw the text. I am glad you drove up there. But do we really need everyone to come? Miles and Tessa are busy. Can't I just come get the key? No, I said calmly. Miles is the one proposing the renovations, right? And Tessa is the one doing the shoot. They are the primary users. I need them to sign the liability waiver. If they do not sign, the insurance is void. You are overreacting with this insurance stuff. Greg sighed. It is just family. You are making a huge production out of a simple favor. I am doing what is right, Dad, I said. I am protecting the asset. Isn't that what Miles said we should do? Optimize the asset. Greg paused. He didn't catch the sarcasm. Fine, we will be there, but don't start with the lectures tomorrow. Okay, Vanessa wants this to be a happy day. It will be a clarifying day, I said. What does that mean? It means we will clear everything up. See you at noon. I hung up. A few minutes later, a text from Vanessa popped up on my private thread. Vanessa. Hi, honey. I know you are trying to be thorough, but really, just give your dad the key when he gets there. We can talk about the paperwork later. We don't want to bore the kids with legal stuff. She was trying to separate me from my leverage. She wanted the key in hand before any discussion happened. Once they had the key, they would never sign anything. They would never listen to me. I did not reply. I turned off the lights downstairs and went up to the loft bedroom. I lay in the dark, listening to the wind howl through the trees. I checked my phone one last time. The security camera feed showed the empty, snowy porch. The new deadbolt was engaged. For the first time in 2 days, I did not feel like a victim. I felt like a prosecutor on the eve of a trial. The battle wasn't about who loved whom anymore. That ship had sailed when they left me on the porch with a pie. This was now a battle of documentation. They were betting on emotional manipulation. They were betting that I would crumble if they used words like family and togetherness. But they had forgotten one thing. I was my mother's daughter, and I was also a professional risk assessor. I closed my eyes. I needed to sleep. I needed to be sharp. Tomorrow. I wasn't just going to say no. I was going to dismantle their entire scheme, piece by piece, while they sat at my table and ate the lunch they brought to celebrate their victory. The silence in the cabin was heavy, but it wasn't lonely. It was waiting. The black SUV crunched heavily over the frozen gravel of the driveway at exactly 12 o'clock. I watched them from the kitchen window, standing just far enough back that they could not see me. My father was driving. He looked tense, his hands gripping the top of the steering wheel. Beside him, Vanessa sat with perfect posture, checking her reflection in the sun visor mirror. She was wearing a cream-colored wool coat that probably cost more than my first car. And her hair was done in loose, glossy waves that had no business existing in the dry winter air. In the back seat, I saw Tessa slumped against the window, looking like a teenager being dragged to church, and Miles, who was already leaning forward, pointing at the roof of my cabin as if he were identifying structural weaknesses to exploit. I took a deep breath. My heart was beating a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs, not the frantic flutter of anxiety I had felt on Christmas Eve, but the slow, adrenaline-fueled thud of a boxer waiting for the bell. I walked to the front door but did not open it. I waited until I heard their footsteps on the wooden stairs. I waited until I heard the beep of the video doorbell I had installed the night before. I unlocked the deadbolt and swung the door open. The cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and expensive cologne. They stood there in a tableau that was almost comical in its arrogance. Vanessa was smiling, a tight, practiced expression that did not reach her eyes. Miles was holding a leather portfolio. Tessa was shivering in a cropped jacket that was fashionable, but useless against the temperature. "Well," Tessa said, her voice sharp and nasal. "Finally, I do not know why you are making this such a production. Avery, it is just a loan for a few days, and you are acting like we are declaring war." "Hello to you too, Tessa," I said calmly. I did not step aside to hug them. I simply held the door open. "Come in. Wipe your feet, please. The floors were just cleaned." Greg looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he had the weary look of a man who had been listening to complaints for a 2-hour car ride. "Hi, honey," he said, trying to inject some warmth into the greeting. "Place looks good, quiet." "It is always quiet here," I said. "That is the point." I led them into the main living area. I had removed the cozy throw blankets. I had taken the candles off the mantelpiece. The room was stark, illuminated by the harsh winter sunlight reflecting off the snow outside. I gestured to the dining table, the sturdy oak table where my mother used to play solitaire and drink tea. I had arranged the chairs on one side. On my side, there was only my laptop and the 3 stacks of documents. "Sit down," I said. "Avery, really?" Vanessa laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "We brought lunch. Can't we just unpack the sandwiches and talk like normal people? You are treating this like a deposition." "We can eat later," I said, remaining standing. "I told you, I need to go over the liability and ownership papers before anyone gets a key. Please, sit." Miles rolled his eyes but pulled out a chair for Tessa. He sat down with a heavy sigh, placing his leather portfolio on the table with a thud. "Let's just get this over with," he said, checking his watch. I want to catch the afternoon light for the perimeter shots. Greg sat at the end of the table, looking uncomfortable. He kept glancing between me and Vanessa, like a referee who had lost control of the game. I sat down opposite them. I placed my hands on the table, clasped loosely. Before we discuss the engagement photos, I began, keeping my voice level. We need to establish the baseline of ownership. There seems to be some confusion about whose name is on this house. There is no confusion, Greg said quickly. It is the family cabin. Your mother left it to you, but we all use it. We always have. Legally. Dad. Family cabin is not a term, I said. I picked up the first document from the stack. It was the certified copy of my grandmother's will, followed by my mother's will. Grandma left the funds to Mom as a sole inheritance, I said, sliding the paper across the table toward him. Mom used those funds to buy this land and build this cabin, and here, I slid the second document, the quitclaim deed. Is the deed. Greg looked down at the paper. I saw his eyes catch on his own signature from 20 years ago. You signed this, Dad, I said softly. You waived all spousal rights to this property. You acknowledged it was her separate asset, and when she passed, the title transferred directly to me, not to a trust, not to a joint account, to Avery Parker. Greg stared at the paper. He shifted in his seat. I know that, Avery. I know the technicalities. But Mr. Henderson just had us do that for tax reasons. It didn't mean it wasn't ours. It meant exactly that, I said. Vanessa reached out and placed her hand over Greg's, covering the document. She looked at me with a pitying expression. Avery, sweetie, you are so focused on the past. Papers are just papers. They don't define a family. What matters is connection. What matters is that we are here, together, trying to share something beautiful. Why are you clinging to legal text when you could be embracing your sister? It was a beautiful speech. If I didn't know better, I would have felt guilty. I am clinging to the legal text, I said, meeting her gaze. Because papers become very important when people try to take things that do not belong to them. The room went silent. The air pressure seemed to drop. Nobody is trying to take anything, Tessa snapped. I just want to take pictures. God, you are so paranoid. You are jealous because Miles and I are happy, and you are sitting up here alone with your papers. Am I? I asked. I turned my attention to Miles. He was leaning back in his chair, looking bored, tapping a pen against the table. Miles, I said, you mentioned in the group chat that you wanted to optimize the property. You talked about utilization rates. What exactly did you mean by that? Miles smirked. He sat up, clearly happy to be asked about his area of expertise. He thought this was his moment to dazzle me with business jargon. Look, Avery, he said, using a tone one might use with a slow child. I am in real estate. It is what I do. I look at this place, and I see wasted potential. You come up here, 4 weekends a year, the rest of the time it sits empty. That is bad asset management. So you want to manage it? I asked. I am saying we could turn it into a revenue stream, Miles said, leaning forward. We fix up the deck, modernize the kitchen, maybe add a hot tub. This location. In the winter you could get $400 or $500 a night easy. I ran the comps. If we start now, we could have a solid cash flow by February. That pays for the wedding, pays for your maintenance costs, and puts money in everyone's pocket. Everyone's pocket, I repeated. Well, yeah, Miles shrugged. I would handle the management, so I would take a percentage. Your dad and Vanessa put up the capital for the renovations, so they get a cut. You get a cut for holding the deed. It is a win-win. We were actually thinking about blocking out the whole summer calendar after the wedding to really maximize the high season. Greg looked up, frowning. Wait, Miles, you said we were just going to rent it out a few weekends to cover the cost of the deck. You didn't say anything about blocking out the summer. It is just a strategy, Greg, Miles said quickly, waving a hand. We have to be aggressive if we want to see a return on investment. I see, I said. So this isn't about engagement photos. It is about launching a business. It is about helping the family, Vanessa interjected, her voice sharpening. Greg, don't look at me like that. Miles is just trying to be helpful. Avery struggles with the upkeep costs. We all know that. I do not struggle with the upkeep, I said. I have never asked you for a dime. But you could have more, Vanessa said. Why be proud and poor when you could be smart and rich? Miles has a plan. We should listen to him. Right, I said. A plan. I reached into the folder next to my laptop. I pulled out a glossy photograph. It was the picture Darlene had sent me, printed on high-quality paper. It showed the heavy-duty real estate lockbox clamped onto my front railing. I slid the photo into the center of the table, right between the deed and Miles's leather portfolio. Then explain this, I said. The silence that followed was absolute. Miles froze. His pen stopped tapping. He stared at the photo, his jaw tightening. Tessa leaned in to look, then recoiled, as if the photo were hot. Vanessa's perfect smile faltered for the first time, her lips thinning into a straight line. Greg picked up the photo. He squinted at it. What is this? He asked. Is that our porch? That is my porch, I corrected him. And that is a contractor's lockbox, the kind used by real estate agents to let strangers into a house when the owner is not home. I looked at Miles. Who put this here? Miles? Miles cleared his throat. He looked at Vanessa, then back at me. I put a temporary box up when I was here last week, just in case. In case of what? I asked. In case you lost the key you didn't have. In case the contractors needed access. Miles stammered. For the estimates, I didn't want to bother you every time a guy needed to measure the windows. Contractors? Greg asked, his voice rising. Miles, you told me you were doing the survey yourself. You didn't tell me you were bringing in contractors. I was just getting quotes, Miles said defensively. Jesus, Greg, I am trying to save you money. You put a lockbox on a house that isn't yours, I said, my voice cutting through his excuses. Without asking the owner, that is trespassing. Miles, if my neighbor hadn't seen it and cut it off, who would have the code? You. Yes, me, Miles said, his face reddening. So what? We are family. And what was inside the lockbox? I asked, because there was no key. Miles didn't answer. He looked down at the table. You were creating the appearance of access, I said. You wanted to make it look like the property was managed. You were staging the scene. Greg looked at the photo, then at the deed, then at his wife. The cognitive dissonance was washing over his face in waves. He wanted to believe Vanessa. He wanted to believe this was all innocent, but the physical evidence, the lockbox on his daughter's house, was hard to ignore. Vanessa, Greg said slowly, did you know about the lockbox? Vanessa smoothed her hair. She composed herself instantly, pivoting back to the victim role. Greg, honestly, I might have heard Miles mention it. I don't know the technical details. They were just trying to be proactive. Why does Avery always assume the worst? She is twisting everything to make us look like criminals. I am not twisting anything, I said. I am showing you a photograph. It is a box, Vanessa cried out, her voice pitching up. A metal box. And for that, you are ruining Tessa's engagement. You are accusing your father's wife of... What, trespassing? I am accusing you of planning something you didn't tell Dad about. I said. Greg looked at me. Avery, stop. Okay, maybe Miles overstepped. Maybe he got too excited about the renovations. But let's not blow this out of proportion. He took the box down. Right, it is gone. Darlene took it down, I said. Miles would have left it there. Okay, so it is down, Greg said, rubbing his temples. Look, can we just reset? We are here. We are talking. Miles, apologize for the box. Avery, accept the apology. Let's sign your waiver and just... Move on. He was desperate for the tension to end. He wanted to go back to the illusion of the happy family. He was willing to overlook the lockbox if I just let it go, but I couldn't let it go, because the lockbox was just the tip of the iceberg. I looked at my father. I saw the fear in his eyes. The fear of conflict. The fear of losing Vanessa. The fear of admitting he had been played. I felt a pang of pity for him. But pity wasn't going to save my house. I cannot accept an apology, Dad, I said, because the lockbox wasn't just for contractors. What do you mean? Greg asked, his hand pausing halfway to his water glass. I reached for my laptop. I opened the lid. The screen came to life, glowing bright in the dimming room. I said, turning the laptop around so the screen faced them, that you don't use a lockbox for engagement photos. You use it for customers. I saw Miles's face go pale. He knew what was coming. Avery, don't, Miles warned, his voice low and threatening. Don't what? I asked. Don't show my father what you have been doing since before Christmas. I looked at Greg. Dad, look at the screen. He leaned forward. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at the image displayed there. It wasn't a photo of the cabin. It was a web page. And as he read the headline, the confusion on his face began to crumble into something much darker. The trap was sprung. Now, I just had to watch them fall. The screen of my laptop glowed with the undeniable evidence of their betrayal. My father leaned in, his glasses reflecting the blue light of the web page. He read the words silently, his lips moving slightly as he processed the title, The Lakeside Haven. What is this? Greg asked. His voice was not angry yet. It was hollow. It was the voice of a man trying to reconcile the reality in front of him with the version of the world he had been living in. It is a rental listing, I said, my voice steady. It is posted on one of the largest vacation rental platforms in the world. It lists my cabin as available for booking starting January 2nd. The nightly rate is $450. I do not understand, Greg said, looking up at Miles. Miles, you said you were just running numbers. You said you were doing a market analysis. It is a mock-up, Miles said quickly. He was sweating now. A faint sheen of perspiration had appeared on his upper lip. It is a draft, Greg. You have to create a draft profile to see the back-end analytics. It is not live. It is live, I corrected him. I created a dummy account this morning while I was drinking my coffee. I sent a booking inquiry for the second week of January. I received an automated pre-approval message 3 minutes later. I clicked the mouse, bringing up the second tab I had prepared. It showed the host profile. And look at the contact information, I said, pointing to the screen. That is not a generic office number. That is 555-0199. Greg turned his head slowly to look at Miles. That is your cell phone number. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Tessa was staring at the table, her face pale. She knew. Of course she knew. You do not plan a wedding at a venue without knowing if you have the venue. So what? Miles snapped. The veneer of the polite, successful son-in-law cracked, revealing the desperate salesman beneath. So we tested the market, big deal. I put up a listing to see if there was demand. That is just smart business. Avery, you wouldn't understand that because you are too busy clutching your pearls and worrying about insurance. You solicited customers for a property you do not own, I said. That is fraud. Miles, it is not market research. It is potential, Miles shouted, slamming his hand on the table. Look, Greg, we are sitting on a gold mine here. I got 3 inquiries in 24 hours. That is $1,500 a week in passive income. We are talking about paying for the wedding, paying off the cards. He stopped. He had said too much. Greg blinked. Paying off the cards. Miles froze. He looked at Vanessa, who was sitting very still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. What cards? Greg asked, his voice dropping an octave. Miles, you told me the business was having a record year. You told me the wedding budget was covered. It is covered, Vanessa interjected smoothly. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were darting around the room like a trapped animal. Greg, honey, do not get distracted. Miles is just speaking hypothetically. He means it would help with the cash flow. Everyone has cash flow issues in January. I am not done, I said. I was not going to let Vanessa talk her way out of this. I was not going to let her smooth over the cracks with her soothing voice and her hand on his arm. I picked up my phone. I spoke to Darlene Price yesterday, I said. She is the neighbor who cut the lockbox off the porch. She was very concerned because she had some interesting conversations with you. Vanessa. Vanessa stiffened. I have no idea who that is. I might have waved to a neighbor. She recorded a voice memo after you left because she found your questions suspicious. I lied about the timing. Darlene had actually recorded the conversation because she was a suspicious old woman who didn't trust strangers. But the effect was the same. She sent me the file. I pressed play. The audio was tinny but clear. It was obviously recorded outdoors, with the sound of wind in the trees, but Vanessa's voice was unmistakable. Excuse me, Vanessa's voice said from the speaker. I am just trying to get a sense of the comps in the area. Do you know if the Parker place was ever refinanced? My husband mentioned something about a home equity line of credit back in 2010, and I wanted to know if that was common for these older cabins. I paused the recording. Greg was staring at his wife. He looked like he had been slapped. Refinanced, Greg whispered. Vanessa, why would you ask about refinancing? I was just curious, Vanessa cried, her composure finally breaking. I was just asking for clarity. Greg, you never explain the finances to me. You leave me in the dark. I just wanted to understand what we were dealing with. Clarity for what? I asked, cutting in. Why do you need to know about the equity in a house that isn't yours, unless you were trying to find out if there was enough value to borrow against it? You are twisting my words, Vanessa hissed at me. I am your father's wife. I have a right to know about the family assets. It is not a family asset. I slammed my hand on the stack of deeds. That is the point you refuse to accept. It is mine, and the only reason you would be asking about refinancing is if you were planning to take out a loan. I turned to Miles. That is it, isn't it? You are not just renting it out. You need a lump sum. Miles looked at the floor. He looked at Tessa. He looked at the wall. He had nowhere to go. We lost the venue deposit, Miles muttered. What? Greg asked. The wedding venue, Miles said, his voice sullen. The plaza. We missed the second payment deadline last month. They canceled the reservation. We lost the $10,000 deposit. Oh my God, Greg breathed. We can fix it, Miles said, looking up with a desperate energy. That is why we need the cabin. Greg, if we can show the bank that we have a rental asset with projected income, we can get a short-term bridge loan. We can pay the plaza, get the date back, and then pay off the loan with the rental income from the summer. It is a solid plan. We just need the deed to secure the loan. You wanted me to sign over the deed, I asked. Just temporarily, Miles argued. Just to add your dad's name so we could use his credit score. We would have transferred it back after the wedding. We weren't stealing it, Avery. We were leveraging it. You were going to mortgage my house to pay for your party, I said, summarizing the horror of it. It is not just a party, Tessa screamed. She jumped up from her chair, tears streaming down her face. It is my wedding, and you are ruining it because you are a selfish, jealous spinster. Tessa, Greg shouted. Sit down. No, Tessa yelled, turning on her mother. You said it was handled. You told me not to worry about the plaza. You said, don't worry, sweetie. We will get the cabin, and it will all work out. You said it was almost ours. The room went dead silent. Almost ours. The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Greg slowly turned his head to look at Vanessa. His face was gray. He looked 10 years older than he had when he walked in. You told her it was almost ours, Greg asked. His voice was trembling. Vanessa reached for him. Greg, honey, she is upset. She is exaggerating. I just meant that Avery would help us. I meant that we are a family and we share things. No, Greg said. pulling his arm away from her touch. "No, that is not what you meant." He looked at me. He looked at the laptop. He looked at the lockbox photo. And finally, he looked at me. Really looked at me for the first time in months. "Christmas Eve," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a realization. "What about it?" I asked softly. "You told me to send her away," Greg said to Vanessa. "You said, 'Greg, she is going to cause a scene. She is going to upset Tessa. Just tell her to leave so we can have a nice night.' You made me throw my daughter out into the snow." "She was going to be difficult," Vanessa insisted. "I was protecting the peace." "You were breaking me," Greg said. The realization was washing over him, horrific and absolute. "You weren't protecting the peace. You were testing me. You wanted to see if I would choose you over her, because if I could kick her out of Christmas, I could bully her out of the deed." "Greg, that is paranoid," Vanessa said, forcing a laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "You are listening to her. She is poisoning you." "She didn't put the listing up." "Vanessa," Greg shouted. His voice cracked, a sound of pure anguish. "She didn't ask the neighbor about refinancing. You did. You have been planning this for weeks, while I was working. While I was thinking about how proud I was to walk Tessa down the aisle, you two were plotting how to pawn my daughter's inheritance because you spent money we didn't have." Vanessa stood up. She smoothed her coat. She realized that the sweet wife routine wasn't working anymore. Her eyes went cold. "We needed the money, Greg," she said flatly. "Miles made some bad investments. We are overextended. If we don't get that loan, we are going to lose the house in Wexford Heights. Not just the wedding, the house. Your house." Greg stared at her. "You lied to me about everything. I was trying to fix it," Vanessa snapped. "And I could have fixed it if your daughter hadn't decided to play detective. It is a cabin, Greg. It sits empty. Why shouldn't we use it to save our lives? Why is her sentimental attachment more important than our survival?" "Because it is not yours," I said. Vanessa glared at me with pure hatred. "You have always been the problem. You and your little legal papers. You think you are better than us." She turned to Greg and grabbed his hand, pulling him hard. "Greg, come outside. We need to talk about this in private. Away from her. She is enjoying this too much. Come to the car." Greg stumbled a step, his habitual obedience kicking in. He looked at the door. He looked at Vanessa's desperate, commanding face. I stood up. "No," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of the entire mountain. "He is not going anywhere," I said. "You dragged him into this mess. You made him the face of your eviction notice. You made him the bad guy so you could keep your hands clean. You do not get to whisper in his ear anymore. This is between husband and wife," Vanessa spat. "No," I said. "This is between the property owner and the people trying to defraud her. And Dad, if you walk out that door with her right now, without finishing this conversation, you are an accomplice. You verify that you are part of the fraud, and I will not just sue them. I will sue you." Greg stopped. He looked at the hand Vanessa was gripping. It was the hand of the woman he had tried so hard to please. The woman for whom he had sacrificed his relationship with me. He looked at the table where the evidence lay spread out like an autopsy of his marriage. He saw the debts he didn't know about. He saw the lies about the family that was actually a financial vampire sucking him dry. He realized, finally, that he wasn't the patriarch of this family. He was just the key they were trying to jam into the lock of my bank account. Greg slowly peeled Vanessa's fingers off his arm. "I am staying," he said. Vanessa's face crumpled from anger into shock. "Greg." "I said I am staying," Greg repeated, his voice gaining strength. "I want to see the rest of the papers. I want to know exactly how much debt Miles is in. And I want to know why my name is on a credit application I never signed." He sat back down. Vanessa stood there, isolated in the middle of the room. Tessa was sobbing into her hands. Miles was staring at the table, defeated. I looked at my father. He looked broken. but for the first time in a long time, he looked like my father again. "Okay," I said, sitting back down. "Let's look at the rest." The silence in the cabin was not the peaceful kind that usually accompanies a snowfall. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a room where the oxygen had been sucked out by a sudden explosion. Miles was the first to move. He did not apologize. He did not look at Greg with shame. Instead, he reached out and zipped up his leather portfolio with a sharp, metallic sound that echoed off the wooden beams. He stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. The charm was gone. The smile was gone. In its place was the cold, flat expression of a man realizing he had bet on a losing horse. "Well," Miles said, looking at Vanessa, not Greg, "this changes the risk profile significantly." "Miles, wait," Vanessa said, her voice trembling slightly. "Sit down. We can figure this out. Greg is just processing. We can still work something out with the bank if we just present a united front." "There is no united front, Vanessa," Miles said. He picked up his phone and checked a notification, dismissing the family crisis as if it were a boring meeting. "You told me the asset was liquid. You told me the daughter was passive and the father was compliant. You said, and I quote, 'She will do whatever Greg says to get back in his good graces.'" I watched my father flinch. That sentence hit him harder than the revelation about the debt. He looked at Vanessa, his eyes wide with a fresh, stinging hurt. "You said that," Greg whispered. Vanessa ignored him. She was focused on Miles, the golden goose that was trying to fly away. "Miles, don't be rash. We have the venue hold until Friday. If we just get the bridge loan—" "I am not taking out a bridge loan on a property with a hostile title holder," Miles interrupted, his voice dripping with disdain. "And I am certainly not proceeding with a wedding that has zero financial foundation. I am a businessman. Vanessa, I don't marry into bankruptcy." Tessa, who had been sobbing into her hands, looked up. Her mascara was smeared down her cheeks in black streaks. "What?" Miles looked at his fiancée. There was no affection in his eyes. There was only calculation. "You heard me. Tess, we are already in the hole for $10,000 on the plaza deposit. Your mother has leveraged the Wexford Heights house to the hilt. If we don't have this cabin to secure the new financing, we are starting our marriage with 6 figures of bad debt. I am not doing that." "You are breaking up with me," Tessa screamed. It was a high, thin sound of pure panic. "Because of a cabin." "I am pausing the merger," Miles said, brutal in his honesty. "Until you people sort out your liquidity issues. There is no wedding. I am going to the car." He turned and walked out. He didn't look back. The front door opened and closed, letting in a blast of freezing air that chilled the room even further. Tessa stared at the closed door. Then she turned to me. Her face was a mask of terror. The arrogance she had worn when she walked in the "it is just a loan" attitude had evaporated. She looked young, small, and desperate. "Avery," she choked out. "Avery, please." I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the table. "Please what?" "Tessa. Please just sign the paper," she begged, leaning across the table. Her fingernails dug into the wood. "He is going to leave me. You heard him. He is going to leave me if I don't fix this. It is just a signature to you. It is my life to me." "It is not just a signature," I said calmly. "It is a lien on my home. It is a risk of foreclosure if Miles defaults, which he clearly will." "He won't default," Tessa cried. "He is smart. He just needs time. Avery, please, I will do anything. I will never speak to you again if you want. I will make Mom apologize. Just give us the deed for 6 months. Please, do not let him walk away." It was pathetic. It was heartbreaking in a way, watching her debase herself for a man who had just admitted he only wanted her if she came with a dowry. But I could not save her from the truth. "Tessa," I said, "if he is leaving you because you cannot bring him a piece of real estate, he was never marrying you. He was acquiring you." "Shut up," she shrieked. "You are just jealous. You want me to be alone like you." "Tessa, stop. Vanessa said sharply. Vanessa stood up. She took a deep breath, smoothing her coat, composing her face into the expression of the long-suffering matriarch. She realized that bullying wasn't working, that Miles's exit had destroyed her leverage. So she switched tactics. She switched to the weapon she had used on my father for years, pity. She walked around the table and stood near Greg. But she spoke to me. "Avery," she said softly, "look, I know we handled this poorly. I know we should have asked you first. That was wrong of us, and I apologize." It was a non-apology, but I let her speak. "But you have to understand," she continued, her voice gaining a wobble of practiced emotion. "We are drowning. The business took a hit last year, the house in Wexford Heights. We are behind on the mortgage. We just wanted to stabilize things. We wanted to give Tessa a good start. I am just a mother trying to keep her family from falling apart. Can't you understand that you have this place? It sits here. It is paid off. You have so much security, and we are fighting just to stay afloat." She reached out and touched Greg's shoulder. "Your father is stressed. Avery, he is not sleeping. If we could just use the equity here for a year, we could pay off the high-interest debts. We could breathe again. Don't you want your father to breathe?" I looked at Greg. He was staring at the table, his shoulders hunched. He looked like a man who had just woken up in a burning house and realized he was the one holding the matches. "I want my father to be happy," I said, "but I will not set myself on fire to keep you warm." "It is not setting yourself on fire," Vanessa pleaded. "It is a loan. Family helps family." "Family," Greg said. The word was quiet, but it cut through Vanessa's monologue like a knife. Greg stood up. He pushed his chair back. The legs scraped loudly against the floorboards. He moved away from Vanessa's touch as if her hand were burning him. "You said family helps family," Greg said, looking at his wife. "But you didn't ask her for help. Vanessa, you told me to hurt her." Vanessa froze. "Greg, not now." "Yes, now," Greg said. His voice was rising, trembling with a mixture of rage and grief. "On Christmas Eve, you told me to lock the door. You told me she was toxic. You told me she was ruining the aesthetic. I stood there and I told my own daughter to go away because you said it was necessary for our family." "It was," Vanessa insisted. "She was bringing negative energy." "She was bringing a pie," Greg shouted. "She was bringing a pie and standing in the snow, and you laughed. I heard you laugh when I walked away." "I was nervous," Vanessa deflected. "You were happy," Greg corrected her. "You were happy because you thought you had won. You thought if you could make me cut her off, she would be so broken she would hand over the deed just to get back in. It wasn't about the wedding photos. It wasn't about the deck. It was about breaking her so we could steal from her." "I did it for us," Vanessa screamed, dropping the soft act. "For your debts. Greg, do you think your insurance commissions pay for the club, for the cars, for the life you like to live? I do the math. Greg, I juggle the bills I needed this asset to keep the lights on." "So you made me a thief," Greg said. "You made me a bad father and a thief. I made you a realist," Vanessa snapped. "Grow up, Greg. We needed the money. Avery has it. She doesn't need it. She has no kids. She has no husband. Why should she sit on a $500,000 property while we lose everything?" There it was, the naked truth. I watched my father's face. I saw the realization settle in. He saw the woman he had defended for 10 years, the woman he had prioritized over me, the woman he had thrown me out for, and he saw that she didn't love him. She loved the stability he provided, and when that stability wavered, she was willing to cannibalize his child to maintain it. "She is my daughter," Greg said. His voice was broken. "She is a grown woman," Vanessa scoffed. "And she is selfish. Look at her, sitting there watching us suffer. Are you happy? Avery, you proved your point. You kept your precious cabin, and now Tessa is alone and we are bankrupt. I hope you are proud." I stood up slowly. The chair did not scrape this time. I was in total control. "I am not happy. Vanessa," I said. "I am relieved." Relieved, she spat. Relieved that I finally know exactly how much I am worth to you, I said. I am worth exactly $450 a night. I walked over to the stack of papers on the table. I picked up the deed. I am going to make this very simple, I said, addressing the room but looking at my father. This cabin is not a wedding venue, it is not a rental property, and it is certainly not collateral for your bad debts. I have filed a fraud alert with the county. If any of you try to list this place, try to show it to a contractor, or try to submit a loan application with this address, the police will be called immediately, not as a family dispute, as criminal fraud. Tessa was sobbing on the sofa now, curled into a ball. Miles was gone. Vanessa was standing with her arms crossed, glaring at me with the fury of a gambler who had been caught cheating, but Greg looked like a man who had been hollowed out. Avery, Greg said. He sounded old. I didn't know about the listing, I swear. I know you didn't, Dad, I said. But you knew about the eviction, you knew you told me to leave on Christmas, and you knew you called me the next morning to ask for the key. You might not have known the mechanism of the fraud, but you were willing to be the enforcer. Greg closed his eyes. Tears leaked out from under his lashes. I am sorry. Sorry doesn't fix the lockbox, I said. And sorry doesn't pay the $10,000 you lost. Vanessa laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. Oh, listen to her, high and mighty. You think you have won. Avery, you have your house, sure, but you have lost your family. Greg isn't going to forgive you for humiliating us like this. We are leaving. Come on, Greg. She reached for him again. She was so confident. She thought that even after everything, the habit of obedience would kick in. She thought Greg would follow her out the door like he always did, muttering apologies, blaming me for making things difficult. Greg looked at her hand. Then he looked at me. He didn't move. Greg, Vanessa barked. I said we are leaving. Miles is waiting in the car. You go, Greg said. Vanessa froze. Excuse me? You go, Greg repeated. He looked at her with a clarity that was terrifying. I am not getting in that car with you. I am not going back to that house to wait for the foreclosure, and I'm certainly not going to sit next to you and pretend you didn't try to rob my daughter. You can't stay here, Vanessa sneered. She won't let you. She hates us. Greg looked at me. There was no expectation in his eyes, only a profound shame. He didn't expect to stay. He just knew he couldn't leave with her. I am not asking to stay, Greg said. I am just saying I am done following you. Vanessa stared at him for a long moment. She realized she had lost him. The financial glue that held their marriage together had dissolved, and without it, there was nothing left but lies and resentment. Fine, Vanessa said. She grabbed her purse. Good luck paying the mortgage on your own. Greg, oh wait, you can't. She marched to the door. Tessa, get up. We are leaving. Tessa scrambled off the sofa, wiping her face. She looked at me one last time, her eyes filled with fear and confusion, before running after her mother. The door slammed shut behind them. The silence returned. It was just me and my father now. He stood by the table, staring at the empty chairs where his perfect family had just disintegrated. He looked at the unauthorized listing on the laptop screen. He looked at the fraud affidavit. He sank back into his chair and put his head in his hands. I threw you out, he whispered into his palms. I threw you out for them. I watched him. I could have comforted him. I could have told him it was okay, that I forgave him, that we could start over. But that would have been a lie. It wasn't okay, and we couldn't just start over. The damage was done. He had made a choice on Christmas Eve, and even though he was regretting it now, the scar remained. I walked over to the window. I saw Miles's black SUV backing down the driveway. I saw Vanessa in the passenger seat, likely already calculating her next move, her next victim. I turned back to my father. He needed to hear one last thing. He needed to understand that this wasn't just about money or a cabin. It was about the fundamental breach of the contract between a parent and a child. I took a breath. I prepared the sentence that would end the argument forever, the sentence that would force him to look at the reality of what he had done, not just to me, but to himself. "Dad," I said. He looked up. His face was ravaged by grief. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply delivered the truth that would change everything. I looked at my father, who was sitting at the table with his head in his hands, and I knew the silence was not enough. He was hurting. Yes, he was ashamed. Yes, but he was still tethered to her. He was still the man who had spent 10 years rationalizing her behavior, making excuses for her ambition, and convincing himself that her greed was just anxiety about the future. I needed to sever that tether. I needed to make sure he understood that this was not just a marital dispute. It was a crime scene. The front door, which Vanessa had slammed moments ago, flew open again. Vanessa stood there, her face flushed with the cold and indignation. She had realized Greg was not following her to the car. She had come back to drag him out, to exert that final bit of control she thought she still possessed. "Greg," she shouted, her voice shrill against the winter wind. "What are you doing? Miles is starting the car. We are leaving. Get up." Greg did not move. He did not look at her. I looked at my father. Then I looked at Vanessa, and I delivered the sentence that would change everything. "Dad," I said, my voice calm and precise, slicing through the tension like a scalpel. "The county recorder just confirmed to me that someone filed a transfer application in your name last night." Greg's head snapped up. "What?" he whispered. "I filed a fraud watch on the title this morning." I continued, keeping my eyes locked on Vanessa. "That is how I knew. The clerk flagged a digital submission. It was a quitclaim deed transfer, attempting to move the title from my name to yours, Greg Parker. And since I did not sign it, and you were not here to sign it, that means someone forged our signatures and submitted it electronically to expedite the process." The color drained from Vanessa's face so fast she looked like a corpse standing in the doorway. "If you keep demanding the key," I said to my father, "and if you get in that car with her, you will have to explain to a lawyer why your name is on a fraudulent government filing. You will be the primary suspect in a felony identity theft investigation." Greg stared at me. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. For the first time, he understood. This was not about a wedding. It was not about a deck. It was not about helping family. They had tried to frame him. They had submitted a transfer in his name so that if the loan went bad, or if I sued, he would be the one holding the bag. They were going to use his credit, his identity, and his legal standing to steal my house, and they were going to let him take the fall if it all imploded. Greg stood up. He turned slowly toward the door. Vanessa took a step back. She looked terrified. She looked like someone who had been caught holding a smoking gun. "It was just a draft." Vanessa stammered, her hands fluttering up to her throat. "Greg, listen to me. It was just paperwork. Miles said we needed to have it ready in case Avery agreed. We weren't going to file it without asking. It was just a misunderstanding of the portal system." "A misunderstanding?" Greg asked. His voice was unrecognizable. It was low, guttural, and vibrating with a rage I had never seen in him. "A misunderstanding does not forge a signature, Vanessa. A misunderstanding does not submit a file at 2 a.m. on Christmas night. We were desperate," Vanessa cried, tears springing to her eyes, real tears this time, tears of fear. "We did it for us, for the house I was going to tell you. I swear, once the loan was approved, we would have fixed it all." "You put my name on a felony," Greg said. He walked toward her. He did not look like the passive, gentle man she had pushed around for a decade. He looked dangerous. "You were going to send me to jail to pay for a wedding." "No," Vanessa shrieked. "Greg, please, Miles said it was safe. He said it was standard practice. What did you do behind my back?" Greg roared. The sound shook the walls of the cabin. "How long have you been stealing my life?" Vanessa could not answer. She shrank against the doorframe, sobbing, unable to spin a lie big enough to cover the truth that was staring them in the face. Greg stopped 3 feet from her. He looked at her with total revulsion. It was the look of a man seeing a stranger in his wife's skin. "Get out," Greg said. "Greg, honey." "Get out," he screamed. "Get off this property. Get out of my life. If you are not gone in 10 seconds, I am calling the police myself, and I am reporting the fraud." Vanessa gasped. She looked at him, searching for a trace of the weakness she had exploited for so long, but she found none. She saw only the hard, cold resolve of a father who had finally chosen his child. She turned and ran. She stumbled down the porch steps, slipping on the ice, scrambling toward the black SUV where Miles and Tessa were waiting. Greg slammed the door. He leaned his forehead against the wood, breathing heavily, his shoulders heaving with the effort of the expulsion. I did not speak. I let the silence settle. I let him hear the sound of the SUV's engine revving, the tires spinning on the gravel, and finally, the sound of them driving away, taking their chaos and their greed with them. I sat back down at the laptop. I had work to do. While my father stood by the door, trying to compose himself, I logged into the rental platform. I sent the final cease and desist order. I flagged the listing as criminal activity. Within 2 minutes, the listing for the Lakeside Haven vanished. Gone. I logged into the county portal. I updated the fraud alert to include the specific attempt made the previous night. I downloaded the transmission log as evidence. I created a digital paper trail so thick that if Miles ever tried to type my address again, his computer would practically combust. It was over. The siege was broken. Greg turned around. He looked older. He looked tired. He walked over to the table and sat down in the chair opposite me. He didn't look at the papers this time. He looked at me. "Avery," he said. His voice was cracked. "It is done," I said, closing the laptop. "The listing is down. The alert is active. They can't touch us." Greg nodded slowly. He looked down at his hands, the hands that had held mine when I was a little girl, the hands that had pushed me away on Christmas Eve. "I am sorry," he said. It was not the defensive, "I am sorry," but that he usually offered. It was naked. "I am sorry I didn't believe you," he continued. "I am sorry I let them into your mother's house. But mostly I am sorry for that night, for the porch." I looked at him. I saw the tears sliding down his cheeks. "You broke my heart, Dad," I said honestly. "You made me feel like I was nothing." "I know," he whispered. "I was weak. I wanted peace so badly that I was willing to sacrifice you to get it. I thought if I just gave her what she wanted, she would finally be happy. I didn't see that she was a bottomless pit." He reached across the table, palm up, but he didn't touch me. He waited. He waited to see if I would allow it. "I missed you," he said. "I missed my daughter. I have been missing you for years. Even when we were in the same room, I let her push you out." I looked at his hand. It was shaking. I reached out and took it. "I am still here, Dad," I said. He squeezed my hand, bowing his head as he wept. It wasn't a magical fix. We had years of damage to undo. He had a divorce to navigate, a financial mess to untangle, and a lot of trust to rebuild. But the infection was gone. The source of the poison had been cut out. I didn't take revenge on him. I didn't rub his face in it. The truth was punishment enough. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was swift and brutal for them. Miles, without the collateral of the cabin, could not secure his loan. The business he had bragged about turned out to be a house of cards built on credit. He filed for bankruptcy 2 months later. Tessa, realizing there was no money and no status to be gained, left him before the wedding date. Vanessa tried to fight the divorce. She tried to claim alimony, tried to claim Greg had abandoned her, but when my lawyer sent her lawyer the file containing the fraud affidavit and the recording of her asking about refinancing a property she didn't own, the fight went out of her. She settled for a fraction of what she wanted, terrified that we would press criminal charges for the attempted title transfer. As for me, I kept the cabin, but I didn't just keep it. I used it. I realized that my mother was right. The cabin was an anchor. But an anchor isn't just to hold you in place. It is to keep you steady while you weather the storm. 6 months later, I walked into the local credit union, the honest one in town, not the predatory lenders Miles used. I sat down with a loan officer. I put the deed on the table. I would like to take out a small equity loan, I said. I am starting a business. I didn't open a fake rental empire. I opened a design studio, Parker Interiors. It was something I had wanted to do since college, but I had always been too afraid of the risk. I had stayed in my safe, corporate compliance job because I didn't think I had a safety net. Now I knew I did. I used the money to renovate the loft in the cabin into a studio. I put in a skylight. I bought the drafting table I had always wanted. I ended the story where it began at the cabin. It was late December again. The snow was falling outside, thick and silent, coating the trees in white. I stood in the center of the living room. The conference table was gone, replaced by the comfortable, mismatched furniture that belonged there. The smell of cedar and wood smoke filled the air. I walked over to the window and cranked it open. The cold air rushed in, biting and fresh, smelling of pine needles and clean snow. I wasn't standing there waiting for anyone. I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't waiting for permission. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the freezing air. I had won. I hadn't won because I destroyed them, though they had certainly destroyed themselves. I had won because I had refused to be a character in their story. I had refused to be the victim, the scapegoat, or the bank. I had written my own ending. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from my dad. Coming up on Saturday to help with the firewood, bringing the apple pie this time. Love you. I smiled. I looked out at the frozen lake, vast and unyielding under the winter sky. My mother had left me this view not just so I could look at it, but so I could see myself in it strong, enduring, and undeniably present. Merry Christmas, Mom, I whispered to the wind, and for the first time in a long time, the wind didn't feel cold. It felt like freedom. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from your car, your kitchen, or maybe your own cozy corner of the world? Please leave a comment below to share your thoughts and connect with others. Don't forget to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so we can share this story with even more people.